Well, good evening. We're about a minute away from starting this. Uh, Beautiful evening. Hope you guys are having a great time. And this is a chance to ask your questions of the superintendent and district leadership team. And we'll get this going in about a minute. Also, if you're flipping through Facebook Lives out there, Bonneville High School has a Facebook Live going on right now for their fine arts, and we shared a link to that. So maybe after you're done with D93 Live, you can go and watch the Bonneville one or set up some split screen and support both. But we're getting set to go here on D93 Live. We'll have a special D93 Live before the election um, next month, so November 4th. But D93 Lives typically happen the Monday after the board meeting, the regular board meeting. So I think we're set, ready to go. And if Dr. Scott Wilson, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philip. As always, appreciate the introduction this evening and grateful to anybody who's able to join us live this evening. And for those of you that may be viewing this on another night this week. Great to have everybody here. I was definitely an eventful week last week in District 93. Not great events, definitely challenging events and things that unfortunately with a district that's as large as ours are sometimes, and I would say it feels like sometimes fairly frequently things that we have to respond to and handle and communicate with our public about. Grateful for the opportunity we have to talk a little bit about those some of those challenges that we went through last week, as well as to celebrate some of the good things that maybe got overlooked in the midst of all the other things that we were handling last week. The first one I want to talk about is what happened on Wednesday. On Wednesday, we did have an interesting situation, and it's definitely one of those that I wish I would say this is a rare occurrence, but it's definitely not a rare occurrence and something that I think we'll continue to see more and more often. And I think that's an important thing for our families to know and for our public to know is that these types of events are only going to increase in frequency, and I'm very convinced of that. It's an important one for us all to be educated about. It's an important one for us to be knowledgeable about because it certainly does create a very significant disruption to our education process, which sometimes that's the intent of the actors in these situations. Sometimes it's not the intent at all, but it's simply what happens as a result of unintended consequences. So let me just walk through a little bit about what happened last week. So first of all, there on the right side of the screen, that is the message that was shared with us early in the morning on Wednesday morning. And as that message was reported to me, the individual that reported it to me said they'd also reported it to both the resource officer at the school as well as the principal. And so they were promptly responding to that. And then I followed up with the school principal a little bit later in the morning, not super late, still before school started, just to get an idea of how the investigation was going, to make sure that we were following up with individuals that had reported it, and they were absolutely taking care of this in a very prompt and effective manner. But these types of things, as you'll see, as you look at and we share the factors that went into this, these are not simple issues to understand what's happened and who's seen it and what the reality of that situation is. So as we look at these threats that sometimes come in, and I use the word threats very generally, I would say that as these posts come in, that certainly create some level of concern from us. I would say varying levels of concern. There are certainly some key factors that we consider as we look at those. And so the very first thing we're looking at is, do we know who made the post? And is that student actually, or that individual actually somebody who's associated with a specific school in our school district? And the answer on this one, as we looked at, is we don't know who made this post. It does not appear to be from somebody directly associated with Thunder Ridge. There's no evidence that shows that they're directly connected to Thunder Ridge, but it's in a forum where students who are associated with Thunder Ridge or enrolled at Thunder Ridge are seeing it, and so that, of course, like I said, heightens our concern. But if we knew, hey, this is a student who's gone to this school, this is a student that we've been very mindful of or aware of, that certainly changes our perspective and our thought process and how we respond to it. So there are just a lot of unknowns about this one, but the primary one was, or the primary things we did know is that there was not a direct association with Thunder Ridge High School. There was no student that we could identify that was tied specifically to it, and there was also not a specific threat associated with that. What we see is a racist post, candidly, along with a picture of an assault rifle, and that's about all that's there. So in all of our responses to any type of situation like this, um, there's there are thought processes we go through to determine how concerned should we be with the safety of our students, and is this something we need to take a much more aggressive approach with in responding to, or is this something that we need to try to calm the waters while we evaluate and work through an investigation process to determine who has made that post. And then going back to that post, there was no actual names of students either who posted it or who were threatened by this situation. So those were all the things that we were looking at that morning while the resource officers were looking into working with the sheriff's office to determine where the post came from. We did determine that the post was made to an anonymous and an unmonitored account called, and not account, a group called Thunder Ridge HS 2027 on Snapchat. And these are, again, I think it's an important thing for the public to be aware of, and especially as a parent, it's something I want to be aware of. And that is, there are these unofficial groups that are created on some social media platforms. This one happened to be on Snapchat. We have no idea who created the group. I think we're still trying to work through to determine whether this is something that Snapchat creates automatically and it's just a completely unmonitored group that anybody can post to, or if individuals have created this, either with an innocent or the message was posted. And that's why students who are enrolled at Thunder Ridge saw it. And I really want to praise them for reporting it. They reported it, I'm sure, in a number of ways. The ones that I was directly informed about was reporting it to parents who then reported to other officials in the school district so that we could investigate and respond to that. So lots of reports about this one, which of course heightened everybody's concern about it, and things definitely started to spread very quickly as more and more people saw that. Um, and which is good, but we really appreciate it when people make direct reports to us at the school level so that we can respond to this and evaluate it and verify if there's new information coming in about this. So, I mean, to that end, this is why we've created the Get Help app. That's an app that's on every Chromebook that students have. It's posted up in schools in a way that students can quickly report these types of situations to us so we can take prompt action in response to those. After several hours and in collaboration with the FBI, they were able to determine that the post actually originated in the United Kingdom. From the United Kingdom, it was sent to a situation that was happening in North Carolina. My understanding is it had to do with some type of gaming um, uh, group where students were, or I don't know if they're students, where individuals were exchanging comments with each other in a gaming group. And so this individual in the UK took a screenshot from somewhere. The original post looks like it came out of Reddit back in 2017 and then posted that. And that's what was seen, unfortunately, by our students. So as a result of that, we ended up with thousands of phone calls being made to Thunder Ridge High School that day. Can't express enough appreciation to the office staff for hanging in there that day and really trying to handle all those calls. It really overwhelmed the system that we have in responding to things. They simply couldn't answer any of the phone calls. It actually overwhelmed the system to the point that they couldn't make calls out of the office either, because every time they were picking up the phone, they ended up answering an incoming phone call. So it really overwhelmed their system. Um, Black Canyon wasn't too much different. They had hundreds of calls placed to Black Canyon. We ended up with more than 1,500 students that ended up being excused by their parents. And I understand. I mean, my kids are enrolled in our schools too. I am absolutely concerned for the safety of my own kids as well as every other student that's enrolled who is enrolled in our schools. I hope our public knows this is not a situation we ever take lightly. He's I'm saying that, but his daughter is enrolled at Black Canyon. The principal of Black Canyon has his own children enrolled there, as well as one of his assistant principals. I mean, this doesn't just hit us as school administrators. This hits us all very personally when we're making these people lightly. But as I said in the communication, it is something we have to be very careful on how we respond to. And if we were to cancel school every time a post like this was made, it would be nonstop school closures. It would just become a completely untenable situation for us. And so, much like with snow days, it's something we just have to evaluate every situation on an individual basis, work through that process that I talked about to determine um, how significant of a threat is there, and do we feel comfortable enough that we're going to send that there isn't a significant risk to something that we're going to keep schools open, and that's very much how we felt on this day. So I know that there's a little bit of, or maybe a lot, I don't know, I don't really pay attention to Facebook, but I heard from a few other people there's quite a discussion on Facebook about what they perceived as a lack of response or a delayed response from us on this. I'll just again assure people we weren't delayed in our response. We are very careful before we communicate information up to the public to make sure that we know exactly what we're communicating, why we're communicating it, and that we're getting out accurate information about the situation. And I wouldn't say that we're 100% perfect in that. I did have, a situation, at least one situation last year where I had somebody that came into my office and visited with me quite in depth, concerned that we had over communicated information that they didn't feel should be communicated publicly. And that was something that was very close to them personally. And so those are the situations that we really have to think through to make sure we're not creating more panic amongst our public. But we also want to keep you. I'm just going to pause there for a minute because I know this was a pretty hot button topic last week, and just give people a chance to weigh in or share questions or concerns about last week before we move on to some of the other things I wanted to visit about.
Scott, when this was going down, you had a regional superintendent meeting, and I know that some of the other superintendents were talking about this. You sort of talked about that, but this is not an isolated D93 thing. This is a nationwide thing that everyone's looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, and I want to be careful on sharing things because I don't want to start false rumors like things can happen. But just the week prior to this, we did receive what we were asked to keep confidential, but it was a warning about a potential. We still don't know if this was associated with that. From everything I've heard, I don't believe that it was. But these things can again happen like this one did, where it appears an individual really had no malicious intent behind this, but due to the nature of social media and how quickly things spread, it certainly created panic. There's other times where we absolutely have intentional actors looking to disrupt educational processes, disrupt, I would say, even go so far as to say our emergency services responses. It's something that we're very vigilant in monitoring. And so I know on the same day that there were other districts responding to similar, if not the same incident. I haven't sat down and talked with them after this to see was it the exact same post? Was it different posts that they were seeing? But this is something that, again, we deal with fairly regularly in school
And
districts now.
Scott, one of the things that made me think of when I first started at Rocky Mountain as an assistant principal, gosh, it was almost 20 years ago. We had a payphone in the hallway, and there were times that kids would pick up and make some type of like a bomb threat, and that was probably the more common thing. Like when I was in school or when I started in administration, and even through that, there were some local, but a lot of times there were some that were outside of our area, just people trying to cause problems, right? And so it's just evolving situations.
Little bit about last week as well. I do think there's one significant difference from those bomb threats that were um, that happened when we were in school and also early in our administrative careers compared to these, and that is school shootings are very real, and unfortunately, not uncommon occurrence in American schools. Bombs rarely, if ever, happened in schools, and so there was this bomb threat, but I think they were rarely taken seriously just because it was unheard of to actually have a bomb go off in a school. But every year, and I would say multiple times in a year, there are shootings in schools, and so these certainly bring a much more heightened level of concern to both us as administration and our families than the old bomb threats used to. So
Well, and
I did notice.
and I
Go
was
ahead,
going to say,
Jason.
and to me, I think it still goes back. Even then, we were taking it serious, right? I mean, even when a call would come in, it wasn't like we were blowing it off saying, it's fake or whatever. We heard everything until.
Yeah. Yeah. I did see one question on there about closed campuses. It's been a lot of years, I think, that since there's been a much of a discussion about closed campuses, and I don't even know if my 20 years in the district, if we've had much of a discussion about that. I think the last time I really remember hearing about one was with the tragic accident that happened out at Beach's Corner, where some students were killed at lunchtime, and typically it's those type of tragic situations that lead to that discussion. I'd say just one reality of our high schools is our kids have very flexible schedules nowadays. We have kids that leave campus not just during lunchtime for lunch, but they leave for work opportunities and come back. They leave for dual credit opportunities and come back. They leave for home release and come back. I mean, our kids are literally just in the day and age that we live in, kids are in and out of those schools a lot for lots of very good purposes. And so, I do think that creating the single access points at our schools has been super helpful. Controlled access points, and we're with the new round of money we're getting from the state. We'll finally be able to do that at Hillcrest High School as well, which is fantastic. We were able to get it done at Bonneville High School over the last couple of years, at Rocky Mountain Middle School. So those are things that we're doing to improve the security. One thing I really want to emphasize that I think is helpful for our parents and public to hear. The most important thing we can do is to really follow the recommendations of national agencies that study these, that spend a lot of time and money looking at school shootings, looking at what happened at those situations, and analyzing what schools can do to effectively prevent these attacks. And hardening schools more so far has not been shown to be an effective deterrent against these types of attacks. What really is very helpful is being very vigilant in monitoring student behavior, monitoring students who may be going through different challenges in their lives, getting help and support for them, documenting the situations where we do have concerns, and making sure we're providing intervention early and often for those situations. Those are the things, and then again, having systems in place where kids feel comfortable reporting things they're seeing on social media, things that their friends may be talking about, or things that they hear, and then actively responding to those are the very most effective ways we can actually respond to these situations, because we could spend honestly tens of millions of dollars hardening our school perimeters and still not necessarily be effective in deterring these situations. And I hate sharing bleak news, but one of the really insightful situations that happened to me, and this happened early in my teaching career, I think back in the 90s, but it has always stuck with me. But one of the earlier school shootings, again from the late 90s, the students pulled the fire alarm and then went outside and shot kids as they came out. And so anything we put in place to try to harden perimeters, if somebody is really intending on doing some damage, taking students' lives, then they can find ways to do that. So having these types of programs in place where we can effectively respond to situations and to threats as we see them, and not just to threats, but to students who have shown a pattern of struggling with different issues in schools. That's the way that the Secret Service has said we can most effectively work to avert these types of tragic situations.
That was a great question, Alice. I appreciate you asking that, and good answer there as well, Scott. One key part of this is that our community wants SROs in our schools. They fund that through the supplemental levy. And on that day with the Thunder Ridge situation, you were on the phone a lot with the SRO at Thunder Ridge.
Yeah, I mean, I typically try to stay out of the way and let them do their job. And that's just one important lesson that I've learned is I may think I'm being helpful and I end up just getting in the way. So what I know is we have good resource officers. I had to report that he was investigating the situation. And so at that point, I'm staying out of the way and letting them do their job. But then absolutely following up with them to talk through what help and support do you need from us? What do we need to learn from this? Hearing from them what they've learned so that then we can share that with our public. And to that point, following that, I had the opportunity to visit with the public relations officer from the sheriff's department so we could put out a joint statement about what we had both learned through that situation and how we were responding to it. So I really do appreciate that relationship and partnership that we have with the sheriff's office. It's invaluable in these types of situations. Anything else we're seeing out there, Phil, or should we go on to some other things from last week?
I think we're safe to move on.
Okay, and again, to our public that's watching, feel free if you have questions that you want to ask, feel free to, and we'll circle back and touch base on those. So, one other ongoing issue that our families may have heard about, our staff, and I've noticed we have staff members tonight. It's just been an ongoing issue this school year has been our network connectivity. And I will just first of all start by saying this affects everybody in the entire district. And so I know sometimes it's easy to think this is just my classroom or just my computer. I'm dealing with it as well. Our tech department is dealing with it. I mean, we've all had frustrations with the network this year, and so I will just maybe start with this, and that is when I was an assistant principal and a principal, I was a little bit of a pain in the butt for the technology department. And I was kind of that headache principal that kept on asking, well, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? Getting in trouble sometimes for the technology department because I did some things that they didn't appreciate me doing without talking to them first. And then after I moved into the district office and I had my first year was done in the district office, our technology director retired and I was asked to take over the technology department. And that was an eye-opening experience for me. And all of a sudden I could see why I was creating some frustration with the technology department, but it also gave me a chance to push back a little bit and say, you know, if we aren't doing something, we need to have a really good reason why we can't do the things that we're doing. But the whole point of that story is what I came to understand is the network that our school district operates is vast and it's complex and it's much different than just my home Wi-Fi network. And so we have multiple internet service providers, all connected through fiber optic cable down, which is fantastic. We have Wi-Fi in all of our schools that wasn't there when I first became technology director, but something we were able to put in afterwards. We had literally have probably in the neighborhood of 16,000 devices, if not more, that connect to the network. It's just an incredibly complex situation. And then on top of all that, just on that network side, by federal law, we have to have certain protections in place for that network. And so we have to have a content filter that restricts students' access, minors' access to pornographic sites. We have to have network firewall to make sure that we're protecting all of the confidential information that we store about our students and our staff. I mean, there's just a lot of complexities that go into this network that aren't things I even have to think about with my home network. And maybe candidly, maybe I should be thinking a little bit more about some of those things on my home network. And so there hasn't been like a single factor that has created the network disruptions that we've had this year. It's been multiple factors. And we did hire somebody who's relatively new to managing the network after we lost our prior network administrator. And that I'll just say that's an ongoing challenge for us in the technology department. We do our best to try to pay competitive wages, but we cannot pay what industry pays for our computer and technology personnel. And we're really, really fortunate that we get good people and when they stick with us. But I walked down the technology hallway the other day, just kind of checking in on things, and I was amazed at how few of our network techs that are there currently were there when I was tech director, and that's only going back about maybe 10 years since I was technology director. So lots of turnover in that department. Doesn't mean that they're not great people that work there. But anytime, especially in the technology department, somebody leaves, and especially if they're in a higher management position like a network administrator or a server admin, there's a lot of institutional knowledge that walks out that door with them. And I would say that's certainly the case with our network connectivity. So in response to that, we have hired a consultant to help us work through and try to identify what some of those trouble spots are, because what we found is, like I said, it's not one single thing that's creating our network slow down, it's multiple things. And so Gordon Howard, our technology director, created a memo that shared, here are all the different aspects of the network that we're looking at and the things that we're doing to ensure that things are functioning correctly, and again working with an outside consultant to work through those. So I will say we are identifying issues, they're working through those issues. I think it's going to gradually get better, but I wouldn't expect that tomorrow all of a sudden the network's going to be working at an optimal level again. But I am confident that we have the right people to identify what those situations are and to keep working through that, so that things can get up and working at an optimal level. And I know how frustrating it is as a teacher, to not have the connectivity that you need to do the instruction that you're planning on doing in your classrooms. So, and as Phil said, just last week we were hosting a regional meeting, trying to get a YouTube video to play to introduce the situation, and the network was not cooperating with us. And it's a very frustrating situation. And I'll just say we're living through it as well. And I would just ask everybody to please be patient, but continue to report through the proper channels the network issues that you are experiencing, so we have a handle on what those actually are. So I'll pause there on that one and see if we have any questions or any comments about the network that we could help answer. Okay. All right. One other bit of a challenging situation we dealt with last week is the news focused story, and I think I do appreciate our relationship. I appreciate our relationship with our news outlets. This one, right in the story, they kind of led with a big explanation that said, typically we don't report on misdemeanors, but because this is a former teacher, we're going to report on this misdemeanor charge as well. So that's the reality of being in public education, is we are held to a higher standard, and candidly, we should be held to a higher standard, and our conduct needs to be irreproachable. And when it's not, then we end up making the news. And we had yet another unfortunate situation with a former employee being charged with. It's an unfortunate situation. Of course, whenever those news stories break, there's criticism of the district, and I'll absolutely welcome that criticism, because this is not the conduct we want from our employees. It's something that we talk about every year with our employees, something that we especially focus on with our coaches in an annual coaches orientation. It's something we strongly emphasize with every new teacher orientation that we do. Something we try to continually remind our principals to have conversations with their teachers about, that we need to be irreproachable when it comes to especially our relationship with students, as well as relationships with each other, and then just making sure we are adhering to the code of ethics for Idaho professional educators, which we all have a contractual obligation to live by. So all that being said, employee situations and student situations are things that we just really have very limited ability to communicate transparently about. Candidly, I would love it if we could just say, here's what happened, here's what we did in response to that, and here's where we are. But Idaho law protects the confidentiality of all personnel records. It protects the confidentiality of all student records. And so our public, is left in the dark knowing how we've responded to these types of situations. And rightfully, I understand why they would have questions and sometimes concerns about that. But I will say that we are diligent when we have situations that are reported to us, and we verify that there is merit to those accusations, that we're following through and following our board policy and following all the state laws that govern the employment of teachers to address those issues. So we really can't speak in specifics about any given situation, but I can promise our public that we don't sweep things under the rug. We spend a lot of time and effort working through these situations. This I think it's helpful to know that sometimes there are false accusations that are lodged against our teachers as well. And so we diligently investigate those. But if there are false accusations, then those are absolutely not anything we're publishing either. So we have to work from the democratic principle that all individuals are innocent until they're proven guilty. But we do thorough investigations, and we find out that there is guilt or responsibility for a violation of board policy or the code of ethics, then we're absolutely taking the steps to address those situations. So again, can't share a whole lot of information beyond that, but I do want our public to be assured that we don't turn a blind eye to situations that are reported to us. Okay. I think that's all the heavy news. So I maybe just give a pause. We've talked about the social media hoax at Thunder Ridge. We've talked about the employee charge for the misdemeanor that happened last week. And we've talked about the network outages. So that's like all the heavy kind of bad news I wanted to share. I did have some good news I wanted to move on to, but I just want to, again, give our public a chance to ask any questions on anything we can clarify before
Scott,
we move
there
on.
was a question about why did it take so long to notify the public? I think that's one that comes up a lot. I would love for you to answer that
Wait,
again.
on which situation?
So back to the Thunder Ridge situation, and mainly, we have to make sure our information is factual and accurate, and that we're not going to ever compete with
Yeah,
student phones and
yeah,
rumors.
yeah. So I think that's a good question, Philip. And let me just go back to this first slide, and that may be blocked out. So I'm going to move this over just in case that's blocking that out. So what I would say is um, this is literally the information we had at 5 o'clock in the morning. So that's all we had, and I there's like had seen this and was reporting it. So there, I'm just gonna be really, I guess, upfront. There's no way I'm communicating this out to the public until we know more about what that situation involves. So we had this shot. This had been shared with me. I think I followed up with the individual that reported it to me, and they said they'd also reported to the principal and the resource officer, and then I knew that they were investigating that. So this would do nothing but create mass panic if we were to share that out at the district level and say, hey, this was seen by a Thunder Ridge student. So we went through a process to assess what do we know, and as soon as we have some type of information where we can either say this is a credible threat or we don't believe there's credibility to this, we communicated that. That did take a couple of hours to work through this, talking with the student who had seen it, working through other reports, that we could make an informed decision on what we would share with our public. So that's why that message didn't come out until right around, if I remember right, I think it's right around 9 o'clock that morning.
Scott, the only other thing I would add to that is in the meantime, while we're waiting for all that information, the sheriff's department has multiple and extra patrol at the school. They're verifying that the school's safe. They're 3 or 4 or 5 different deputies at the school. They're monitoring all of our schools in the meantime. So there was a lot going on behind the scenes while we were investigating and determining what the credibility of that threat was.
Thank you, Heath. I appreciate that.
Now
Okay.
let's get to that exciting audit report.
Okay. Yeah, nothing more exciting than an audit report. So, but it was yet another great audit report. And the funny thing about audit reports is, you would never know from the language that it's a great report. They never come out in an audit and say, you guys are doing an awesome job. They may tell us that verbally, but they never ever print that. And so that's not how it gets communicated. The way it gets communicated out is that there were no findings. And so it's certainly one of those that no news is great news. I think this is probably somewhere around 5 years in a row that we have had zero findings. The last time we did have a finding in an audit, it was for me, it was just a really interesting situation because it was a finding and something that was reported. Prior year was working in a federally funded position, and then the principal had assigned them to a non-federal position, and that communication didn't get all the way through to the payroll department. And so we were still paying that employee from federal funds when they should have been being paid from state funds. And so that was a finding that year, or something that we put in processes to monitor more closely. But some I wouldn't something that's really that somewhat trivial in my mind. I mean, we obviously want to make sure we're using federal funds which are intended to be used, but it wasn't a finding saying you're not budgeting correctly, you're not accounting for things correctly, you're not being responsible. It was just one oversight was the last finding that we had, and so Guy and his team have done just a fantastic job. I am still amazed at the quality and quantity of work that comes out of the district office with this few people that work there in all the departments. And so just really appreciate the attention to detail and the level of monitoring we've had, especially with all the influx of ESSER dollars over the past 5 years, and how much more attention that's taken and workload that's taken to make sure that all of those are being accounted for correctly and being spent according to the laws and rules that come with those. So with that overall, the best news is that again, there was absolutely no findings in our auditing, in our internal procedures and how we're accounting for the dollars, in our oversight of the dollars. All those things came back with what you would say is an A+ rating. They just don't put it in those words. As a quick just overview of our budget, this hasn't changed very much. And at least my 10 years in the district, but we spend just right around 90% of our overall expenditures go to salaries and benefits. And so we're very much a service-driven organization, and most of our money goes to simply paying people. And then you can see where the rest of the money goes after that. So just a high level overview of that. So the reality of that is when we do have to look at budget reductions, the only way to effectively reduce our budget is by freezing pay or eliminating positions. And so that's the challenge as we look ahead at our budget, as we look at as the funding for from the state level shifting from a being based on enrollment to attendance, and the decrease that will come as a result of that, it's going to be a challenge for us because to cut out $5 million, we know 90% of that 5 million is likely going to have to come from salaries. And so those are just the kind of the looking down the road, the challenge that we're looking at of how do we address this, where are cuts that we can make. And the other thing I would say that the last time we had to look at this type of budget reduction, going back to the recession and right around 2010, we had much more flexibility in how to reduce staff than we have today. And so just looking ahead, the news from the audit right now is great news, but we're always taking it with a grain of salt because we're looking down the road in a year or two and looking at at the budget adjustments we know we're going to have to make sure we keep our budget running in the black. So that's kind of the got to think what the category is here, Guy. It's really by type of expenditure, and then this one goes to the different areas, and so you can see 7.5% of our budget goes to pay for administrative expenses. 63% goes to pay for instructional expenses. And then just the other categories that make that up. So transportation is just under 5%. Support services is just over 13%. Our operations is about 8.5%. So these are just the high level reports that we get back. Something we watch every year. We talk about every year. It's pretty rare that we ever see much of a shift into any one of those categories. They'll stay really pretty similar, unless there's a particular year that might change one of those categories. So, guys, is there anything else you want to share about the audit or the budget?
No, I think you covered everything well. Just a big shout out to my team. Everybody takes a lot of pride in their work, and it's always a great relief when the audit comes back and nothing has been found. So
So this process again, we have an independent firm that comes in. They start, I think I said they started in June this year, if I remember right. They come on site, they work through, they look at all of our record keeping, they look at our processes, they take that work back with them to their office and they work through it. And it's, like I said, it starts at the end of June and then we do the report in October. And so it's about a 3 to 4 month process to go through to complete the audit. So it's thorough, it's independent, and should give our public a lot of assurance that we are handling public funds the way that they are intended to be handled, and with a high level of fiscal misses happening with those public funds.
And it's a team. Like these guys come in here in June and they take like the boardroom, you see the board meetings, they take all those seats that are up there on where the board sits. And these guys go to work. Like it's you can tell it's harder to find a parking spot here when they're here. Those guys go to work. It's a full-on team. Maybe talk about that process. You said it's very thorough, but I just wanted to show that there are multiple people that come in here to really take a look.
So, and we have a long-standing relationship with an auditing firm that's been very helpful to us. One big difference this year, to your point, Phil, we had multiple people on site in the office. Kind of the boots on the ground facet going through things, but the actual audit report was given from an individual back in Chicago, and so this is actually a national firm that is doing the audit. And so while we have that local presence and local relationship, the report came back from a lady in Chicago that was giving the report to the board. So lots of oversight about this to make sure that it's done the right way. Okay, so with that, we'll just shift over to the supplemental levy. Again, coming up in November on election day this year, I think we've probably started communicating this to death with our folks. We want to make sure it is on people's radar so that as you go to the ballot box, you're informed about what the supplemental levy is and how much it's going to cost. And so I've got I think it'll be a helpful graph here in just a few minutes about that. But we estimate that the average annual cost will be $77 per $100,000, which is what we paid for the last year and pretty close to what we paid the year before that. And this levy would be a 2-year levy if it's approved. And then by state law, we cannot run this longer than 2 years. And so I know that's a question that comes up a lot is, well, why are you coming back? Didn't we already approve this? The answer is this expires every 2 years for us. And so that's the high level overview of it. Here's a little bit more detailed overview. So I don't remember when the law on this changed, but this was always a question we would get from our patrons of where does the money go? And we didn't have a great answer because it just went into our general fund and then just kind of helped pay for a lot of different things. But the state implemented a new law that said on the ballot we need to disclose exactly where we plan for the money to go, and then at the end of the fiscal year, again part of that auditing process, then Guy prepares a report that gets published out in the newspapers and says this is actually where the money was spent. That's right, Guy, isn't it? It goes to the newspapers if I remember
Yes,
correctly.
that's correct.
Newspapers, if you're a Gen Xer, those are things that get printed and you can actually buy them in stores. You can even have them sent to your house. You've got them sent to your house, but all of our laws are still tied back to newspapers. So anyway, so that gets published in the Post Register, and we've been able to match this up dollar for dollar on this is what we said we're going to use it on, and we've actually shown that that's exactly where the money went. So this is the list of where that $5.8 billion goes. Again, if you go back to a minute ago to that audit slide that I showed, and knowing that 90% of our budget goes to salaries and benefits, not a surprise that that's pretty close to what happens with our supplemental levy as well. A couple of things that don't go specifically to salaries and benefits, this contract for our school resource officers. This year, that contract is just over $700,000. And so you can see the supplemental levy right now pays for just about half of that. Doesn't even pay the full amount for the school resource officers we have. So we make up that other 350,000 ish dollars from state funds that we get through safe and drug-free schools, as well as from what is called discretionary funding. We do have a budget of about $500,000 for classroom resources and supplies. Right now, there is no line item from the state for anything to do with classroom resource item. We lost that this year, and so we don't have a single dollar from the state that is intended to go towards textbooks or computers or any of the programs we have that our kids access through their Chromebooks. And so we really appreciate something of an earmarked budget to put resources in the kids' hands for learning. And then, as you can see, the rest of it, we just try to be pretty thorough in our breakdown of how much we're using from the supplemental levy to supplement pay for different individuals. I'll say other school districts take a different approach. They just put in supplement pay for personnel and they kind of lump it all together. But we thought it would be helpful for our patrons to see, the dollar amounts that we're contributing towards the different categories of employees that we have. This morning, as we were talking about this, there's a question raised about student supervision workers and kind of the concern that that's not super clear. So those types of positions include our duty aides, our crossing guards. They include people that work in our schools in capacities and helping with things like supervised suspension or lunch intervention or those types of things. And so that's what we mean by student supervision workers. So again, that's the overview of where the dollars will go if the supplemental levy is renewed. And also should paint a pretty good picture of if we don't get a renewal on the supplemental levy, the impact that that's going to have on our school district. And so definitely something to be mindful of as people go out and vote on November 5th. Here's just one chart. I can't get through one of these D93 Lives without showing some type of bar charts. So this one is just kind of a historical look back at our supplemental levy. So the blue columns, light blue columns, are the amount that we have collected in the supplemental levy for the past 16 years. So going back to 2008, we had a $2 million supplemental levy. In 2010, our voters approved an increase to that, so it went a little bit above $2 million. Somewhere around 2012, we were closer to $3 million, not quite to $3 million. And you can see that stayed in place for about 5 years. And then in 2018, it was getting harder and harder to maintain the programs that we were offering, and there were programs also that we had cut back in 2010, 2012 with the recession. Things like PE and music programs in our elementary schools. The GATE program is something that we had drastically done differently. There were a few other things like that we had eliminated from the budget, that then in 2018, when we asked for an increase to the supplemental levy, we said we could bring those things back. And so you can see we've been living on that same dollar amount of $5.8 million for the past 6 years at District 93. Our enrollment, interestingly, has grown a little bit over that time, but it has not grown a ton. And so we've kind of, with COVID happening and a few other things, I wouldn't say we're completely flat, but we haven't grown like we grew in the early part of the decade for sure. So that's part of the reason why we've been able to live on the supplemental levy where it's at. But with this drastic shift in state funding, we are having to spend down our fund balance to maintain our current operations. At this time, our board decided to not ask for an increase to the supplemental levy, even knowing that we're deficit spending right now. The board's perspective, and I think it's the right one, and I appreciate it, is let's spend down the excess that we have in savings before we ask our local taxpayers to pay more out of their wallets. And so that's the approach we're taking this year. We expect to see probably around a $4 million reduction in our savings account. We could live on that for at least this year. And then after this year, we'll have a much better idea between what state funding looks like after this year, as well as where our enrollment and attendance actually ends up after this year, on how much we actually had to spend down from our savings account. But there is a chance we may be talking about next year asking for an increase to the supplemental levy. But for this year, the board felt that the right decision was to keep it at that $5.8 million per year. And so if this is approved, you'll see that those columns would extend out for 2 more years. The interesting thing, and I think this is often a common question, is with all the growth in the school in the district, why are you asking us for more money? And so this is a good example of what actually happens when we see growth in the school district. So you can see, I'm going to go back to 2008. So to generate the $2 million of supplemental levy funds in 2008, all of us that lived here back then, we paid $101.64 per $100,000 to generate $2 million. As our tax base has grown, and you can kind of see how the supplemental levy mirrored that tax base growth a little bit. So every 2 years, you can see that the supplemental levy increased between 2008 and 2012. So as the supplemental levy increased, the dollar amount per $100,000 went up a little bit. But then keeping that supplemental levy about the same as the market value grew, the amount that people were paying per $100,000 actually dropped from 131.65 in 2013 down to $106.50 in 2017. And then we had a big jump because, again, our voters approved an increase. We went from right around $3 million in the supplemental levy to $5.8 million. So at that time, we paid the most we've ever paid for the supplemental levy. We all paid $202 per $100,000 per of taxable value back in 2018. But because we've kept that amount the same for the past 6 years, as our market value has grown, you can see that we're all paying less per $100,000 to support that same amount. So this last year, we would have paid $78 per $100,000 for the supplemental levy, and that's right about the same amount we expect. Forecasting no growth in the market, that's what we'll all pay for the next 2 years going forward. So just kind of interesting that here in 2024, we're paying less per $100,000 than we did in 2008, but we're getting almost 3 times as much money coming into the school district from that because of that growth in our market value. So I know that kind of gets to be a little complex, but it is a question we get a lot from our patrons. So I just wanted to kind of talk about how that market value actually impacts the district. Again, it doesn't turn into more revenue to the school because we're capped at the amount that our voters have approved, which is $5.8 million. But as the market value does grow, as we see new construction happening in the school district, even as our assessed values go up, then the amount that we pay per $100,000 automatically goes down for the supplemental levy. So with that super complex thing and Phil rubbing his eyes and saying it's his bedtime, I'll pause there and see, just to wrap up for any questions at all. We've talked about a lot of different things tonight, but we're wide open for any questions that anybody has on anything happening in District 93.
And those dollar amounts are per year, right? So
Yeah, per $100,000 per year.
interesting.
So I'll just do a quick rundown. My wife loves it when I do this, but I think the assessed value of our home right now is somewhere around 450,000. We built it right about the start of the supplemental levy for 220. I think our assessed value is 450. That gives us a taxable value of 225. Nope, 325 of about 325,000. So I would multiply, 300 by my 80, and I'm going to be paying right around $240 out of our tax bill for the supplemental levy if this is approved per year.
All right, we have a question. It says lots of D93 families have ties to District 91. Have the two districts been collaborating on school calendars for main holiday and spring breaks?
Um, I wouldn't use the word collaborating. I've had some discussions with their superintendent. I will say I think that Carla Larange, who's the superintendent in District 91, and I have probably the most collaborative relationship of the two superintendents in D93 and D91, at least in the last 20 years. So I don't know how it was back in the 90s, but she and I talk a lot, work together really well, and I really appreciate Carla and the work she's doing in District 91. what we did in our district is we were typically adopting about a 3-year calendar, and we were typically adopting that ahead of District 91's adoptions. And they did, I would say that they followed our schedule pretty closely. Last year, there was a pretty significant difference with Christmas break. We went with what our what our families told us in a survey, where they wanted Christmas break to fall, which was a week later than when they wanted it to start and end, which was a week later compared to District 91. But we felt it was pretty important that we do what our family said, and then we did line up to their spring break. And then at that time, we adopted one more year's calendar ahead, and District 91 didn't have theirs adopted for that. So we did push our spring break out a little bit later, because that's again what our families told us they wanted to do in a survey. And I haven't talked about that with District 91's superintendent to see what they're doing this spring break. But I do know our Christmas breaks line up, our Thanksgiving breaks line up. Spring break is one that I'm not 100% sure on. And we did adopt one more year's calendar after that too. So I think next year we go right to the last week of March for spring breaks. We've pushed that about 2 weeks later than we used to do with our traditional spring break.
All right, this is your last chance to ask your questions. Any questions you might have that our district leadership team and superintendent can answer, get them in there. We would love to address those for you. So coming up on 8:56 p.m. Had a great presentation. Go ahead,
Phil,
Scott.
no, yeah, sorry. Let me say one thing, Phil, and then Sam, you jump in.
Okay.
Phil mentioned this earlier in the broadcast, but we do have a special D93 Live scheduled for March 4th, November 4th, the night before elections. Just one more chance for people to ask questions about the supplemental levy, just to give people a reminder to get out and vote, not just for the presidential election, but also for our important state races that'll be on the ballot, as well as the supplemental levy, which is the very last thing on the ballot that I saw, at least on my ballot. It's right at the very bottom. So don't forget to flip the page and go through those questions on the back as well. Go
I was
ahead,
going to say,
Sam.
remind everyone about parent-teacher conferences this week.
Oh yeah, it is parent-teacher conferences this week. So hopefully you'll get out, visit with your teachers. Great chance to just have that face-to-face interaction with teachers and see how your kids are doing. So tomorrow night we had to move the high schools for Monday night because we had the college fair tonight. So high schools will be tomorrow night, and our elementaries are from 4 to 8, and our elementaries are running from 4:30 to 7:30 tomorrow night, and then our elementaries will run again on Thursday night, also from 4:30 to 7:30, and then
there's no school on Friday.
Yep, no school Friday. Teachers after those long nights of parent-teacher conferences, been a long-standing practice and tradition that we have the Friday of those parent-teacher conferences offered for teachers to get some much-needed R&R after teaching all day and having parent-teacher conferences into the evening.
I'm at the district office. It looks like a great response a great showing over at Rocky Mountain. In fact, I thought there was another audit happening. There were so many cars in our parking lot, Scott.
Yeah. This is definitely an opportune time that we're bringing in people to help just do professional learning. I think one of the most important things we believe in our district is the best way to improve student learning is by improving the learning of the adults in the system as well. So that's why learning and literacy is one of our cornerstone values, something we don't just put on the wall, but something we're all committed to, of how do we learn and get better. And so did a great job with special education personnel today, bringing them in for some professional learning. We're going to follow that up with our principals tomorrow. Speaking of election day, for the first time ever, we won't have school on election day. That'll be a professional learning day for our all of our employees as well. Not all our employees, our certified employees as well. And but kids will get to stay home on election day, and that's been something that's been brought up over the years and somewhat of a concern for the safety of students with much more of an open door policy on election days, and our state really does need our schools to serve as election sites. So we haven't done that for every election, but in the November even years, we have calendared those to be non-school days for our kids. Okay. One last chance for any last questions from anybody.
Nope,
well-
no questions.
Perfect. So thank you again for taking time to join this evening. Thanks to my team for coming out and supporting these every month as well. I'll just say teamwork is another cornerstone, and it's something we really live by in our district. And the reason why I believe we're a great district is because we work together to do the right things for our kids and for our faculty. So appreciate everybody who gives up time away from your families to help support doing these D93 lives, and appreciate our families for taking the time to watch them. So we'll see you back here on November 5th. And in the meantime, again, any questions that come up, feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to respond to those questions. So thanks everybody, and have a great evening.
November 4th. Sorry, November 4th. The election.
November 4th.
Yes.
Thank you, Philip. That's teamwork. Appreciate that, Philip.